Chapter 2. Autumn. Cool breeze. Bright moon. Long past the dormitory's lights-out curfew, Yixing tossed and turned, finally drifting off to sleep. Will she come again? She wondered. From the distant emptiness came a melody of natural sounds, vaguely indistinguishable as to what instrument produced it. The music drifted through the crack in the slightly open window, and Yixing found it strangely comforting. Suddenly, a flash of white light erupted, and a girl in a long white dress slowly emerged from the blinding glare. Yixing strained her eyes to get a clear look at the girl's face, stepping closer. A mangled face, drenched in blood. "You've come again. What do you want?" Drops of fresh blood splattered on Yixing's face, and she screamed in terror, powerless. It was the same dream. 2 months of military training had quickly passed, followed by a hectic schedule of classes that left Xing feeling truly exhausted. Adding to that, she had recently become a key figure in the school's radio station, seemingly responsible for everything from interviews and editing to reading the news. But it wasn't just exhaustion that kept her restless. For many nights, she had been tormented by this recurring nightmare. After each horrified awakening, she would recall the dream and blame Ouyang Shan for telling the story of the murder conspiracy in room 405. "I must be too stressed, and the fear has seeped into my mind." But Xing still dreaded sleep, terrified of reliving that scene. "Am I really the master of my own fate?" Xing thought of her father, once the head of a large factory, who, after retiring, spent his days at the mahjong table, unable to do anything more productive. In contrast, her mother, once an ordinary textile worker, had diligently studied and risen to become a famous fashion designer. Ouyang Shan was wrong the other day. People weren't just tiny dust particles blown about by the wind. People were advanced animals capable of conquering themselves. No ghosts or spirits could invade them. The more Xing thought about it, the more the fear receded, and gradually she drifted off to sleep. Unfortunately, she was not the master of her dreams. A lilting melody played, seemingly lifting her to float among the clouds. The clouds constantly contracted and expanded, and a streak of moonlight appeared before Xing. "Who is she?" Xing seemed to hear the sound echoing from all around. The girl put her finger to her lips and whispered, "Oh," then extended her hand towards Xing. "When I was little, my grandmother always warned me not to go near the riverbank, because the drowned ghosts would reach up and grab your legs, dragging you down to drown. If this girl is the ghost who jumped from the building, will she drag me to jump too?" Xing felt she couldn't control herself. She slowly reached out her hand. Finally, she touched the white-clad girl's hand. Ice cold. Xing opened her eyes wide, wanting to see the girl's face clearly before they parted, but she was also afraid of seeing that blood-soaked, mangled face again. But this time it was different. The blinding glare gradually faded, and the girl's face became clearer, a pale and whole face. It was Ouyang Shan's face. "Ah!" Xing cried out in terror, but Shan immediately covered her mouth with her hand. "Little brat, it's me! Don't yell and wake everyone up." Xing awoke with a start, trying to see clearly in the darkness. Shan, who usually slept in the upper bunk, was clearly sitting beside her. Her pale face was right in front of her. "What are you doing? You scared me to death." Yixing was still terrified. She saw Shan wearing her long, white nightgown, her cold hand clutching hers tightly. "Let me guess. You thought I was the girl in the white dress, with a smashed face, from your dream, didn't you? You're such a scaredy cat, your guts are tiny." Shan laughed triumphantly, which annoyed Xing. "Me, a scaredy cat? Try sitting next to Leily's bed and see if she doesn't scream and wake up the whole building," she said defiantly, but in reality Xing was secretly laughing at her own timidity. Shan clicked her tongue lightly. "I don't know why, but I couldn't sleep tonight. Lying in the upper bunk, I could tell you kept tossing and turning, and I guessed you weren't asleep either, so I thought I'd ask you to go for a walk, but I didn't expect you to be dreaming." Exactly. I was woken up by you. You've achieved your goal, right? In the dead of night, I can't go out with you. I don't belong to your ghostly Shan girl gang. Xing, I'm begging you. Shan pleaded, guessing that the easygoing Yixing would definitely agree. Xing, just awakened from her nightmare, was too scared to fall back asleep, so she agreed. But the entrance to the building is locked. How can we get out? Shan lowered her voice. I've been scouting for a long time. At the bend in the staircase from the first to the second floor, there's a large window, with one of the iron bars missing, a contribution from the students who stay up all night studying. A slightly overweight person can't squeeze through, but someone as thin as you and me definitely won't have any problems. Outside the window is a wide eaves overhang, which also serves as the roof of the staircase entrance. We'll crawl from the overhang to the window outside the first floor water tank. This window is only about 1.5 meters above the ground. Shan got up and walked over to Umin's bed, stood there for a moment, then turned back and continued, Taoist Umin is fast asleep. We can set off. Under the moonlight, Shan and Xing walked several laps around the sports field, talking about things in their class, commenting on a few of the boys, and laughing together. Shan suddenly pointed ahead. Let's go see what's over there, and then we'll go back. Okay. If Shan had explicitly said they were going to the anatomy building, Xing definitely wouldn't have agreed. It was too late to refuse now, as they stood before the small, old, European-style building, staring intently at the pale gray walls illuminated by the moonlight. For some reason, Xing felt a chill. I must be dressed too lightly. I feel a little cold. Let's go back. This is the Holy Land where many ghost stories in our school originate, Shan said nonchalantly, as if she hadn't heard Xing at all. She stared blankly at the building with an awestruck look, which terrified Xing. You're terrible, tricking me into coming here for a pilgrimage. I'm going to have a serious talk with your mother, telling her that her daughter is very eccentric. With that, Xing turned to leave. Shan immediately grabbed Xing and pulled her back. People say that all the ghost stories in the anatomy room happen after midnight. How often do we have the opportunity to come here so late? Don't you want to go inside and see if it's true? Don't be scared, don't be scared. In all those ghost stories, no one has ever died in this experimental anatomy room. Tonight, we must discover this ghostly mystery. Surely nothing will happen, and we can conveniently report to Taoist Umin that we've swept away the superstitious feudal ideas that have haunted our school for decades in just one night. Isn't our thinking progressive enough? Xing still didn't turn around. If you're interested, go ahead. Then the credit for sweeping away superstition will belong to you. I'm not going to leech off you. But, Shan didn't know what to say, but she still clung tightly to Xing's sleeve. Xing suddenly understood. So you're just pretending to be passionately curious. In reality, you're also scared, right? Shan said angrily, I'm not scared of anything. What kind of friend are you? I wasted my time going for a walk with you in the middle of the night. I'll go in by myself, don't try to stop me. Seeing that Shan was still holding her hand and wouldn't let go, Xing thought that this good friend, though quirky and stubborn, was both headstrong and lovable. Xing had to give in. All right, fine. I don't know what good deeds I did in my past life that I have to encounter a mischievous spirit like you in this one. Come on, let's go take a quick look and get out. The two of them crept along, side by side, moving as quietly and cautiously as if they were afraid of disturbing. But who was there in this building to worry about disturbing? Finally, they reached the door, and Xing whispered, Why did they build such a high threshold? Shan replied, There are many explanations. To prevent floodwater from entering during heavy rain, to prevent formaldehyde leaks. But saying it's to prevent ghosts and spirits from escaping is the most believable. Xing clicked her tongue. If you keep talking nonsense, I'll never believe anything you say again. You go first. Shan stopped. Xing could only shake her head, then stepped over the threshold. They both stared intently at the brass doorknob, then froze. "You open the door!" Shan's whole body trembled slightly. Xing shook her head again, grabbed the doorknob, and opened the door. Before them was a region of inky blackness. Shan switched on the flashlight she had prepared in advance, but the light wasn't strong enough. Only a faint corridor could be seen. They both stood there stunned again. Shan had just opened her mouth to say, "You," when Xing immediately cut her off. "You go first." Xing took a step forward, muttering, "Shan is really... I know you don't dare go first." No sooner had Xing finished speaking than Shan jumped in with energy, not showing any of the fear she had displayed earlier. She swept the flashlight around, calling out loudly, "Where are you all? Your little sister has come to visit. Don't disappoint me." Only then did Xing realize she had been tricked by the weird and clever Shan. Xing muttered and sighed, grumbling, "If you call out like that, even if there are members of your gang around, they'll be scared to death and hide away." Shan laughed. "Okay, then I'll be more polite." The flashlight went out suddenly, and everything around was as black as ink. Shan also fell silent. A cold gust of wind suddenly enveloped Yixing, making her shiver uncontrollably. So darkness could make people so terrified. Xing took a deep breath, but the coldness didn't dissipate. Shan also didn't say a word. After a moment of silence, Xing, at her wit's end, had to speak. "Hey, Shan, stop messing around, turn on the light." Shan didn't answer. Everything around was as quiet as the grave. "Where is Shan? Stop playing tricks." Xing's voice trembled slightly. Again, silence. Xing was tormented by feelings of loneliness and fear. Each passing second seemed to last an eternity. She was just about to cry out when a soft voice came. "Don't speak so loudly." Thank goodness, it was Shan's voice. "Don't rush to scold me. I'm still listening carefully. I think I can hear footsteps." Shan spoke softly, but to Xing, it sounded like thunder in her ears. "What? Footsteps?" Xing held her breath and listened. It was true. Heavy footsteps seemed to be outside the building, but they were getting closer. They were coming towards them. "I hear them too," Xing said softly, not knowing how much longer she could stand there. The footsteps grew closer and closer, heavier and heavier, as if walking on muddy ground, each step leaving a deep imprint in the mud. Xing's heart pounded. How could a normal person have such heavy footsteps? If not a normal person, then what could it be? Could they just stand there like that forever? "Quick, let's run to the last room and hide." Shan pulled Xing, and they both ran to the end of the corridor. Shan switched on the flashlight again. On both the right and left sides of the end of the corridor were two small rooms, with their doors only partially closed. At this moment, Shan could still crack jokes. "Should we flip a coin to decide which room to hide in?" Ignoring Shan's lengthy explanation, Xing just pulled Shan into the room on the right. Shan still wouldn't give up. "Hey, Xing, even though it's just a simple decision, two choices to pick one, it could still have consequences. One wrong step could bring a lifetime of regret." The room reeked of a terribly foul odor that stung the nose. But at this moment, Xing was completely overwhelmed by the strange footsteps outside the door, so she didn't notice anything else. After entering the room, Shan immediately locked the door. The footsteps suddenly stopped at the entrance to the building. It seemed to be hesitating whether to enter. That was dangerous. Xing suddenly remembered that when they entered the corridor, they hadn't closed the front door of the building. Wasn't that implicitly signaling to someone that there were people inside? No wonder it was hesitating. It must be very familiar with this building, so seeing the door open in the middle of the night, it thought it was strange. Who could be so familiar with this place and have such strange, heavy footsteps? Could it be that the ghost stories that had circulated around the school for so many years were true? Could it be that this small building was a holy land for strange ghosts and spirits? The more she thought about it, the more scared she became. Xing retreated instinctively, and suddenly a cold, stiff hand pressed against her cheek. No, it wasn't human. It was a set of claws. Is that you, Shan? Xing asked softly in despair. Of course, it couldn't be Shan playing around. Shan was clearly standing in front of her. Shan turned around and looked in surprise, then switched on the flashlight. Xing saw Shan's expression change rapidly, and she quickly covered her mouth to avoid crying out. But Shan immediately smiled mischievously, and at that moment, Xing knew she had been tricked by Shan again. When she turned her head, she was terrified out of her wits. A complete skeleton was standing right behind her. It was a human skeleton model used for teaching, hanging on an iron frame. When she first came to school, she had seen it once when she visited the anatomy building. She didn't expect to meet it here tonight. The footsteps sounded again, this time in the corridor. Xing could only pray silently, hoping that the footsteps would stop before they reached the end of the corridor. But the footsteps grew closer and closer. The floor vibrated with each step, and Xing's heart vibrated along with it. Finally, the footsteps stopped at the end of the corridor. Shan suddenly pulled Xing closer, whispering in her ear, "It'll probably flip a coin to decide which room to turn into. Let's hide further inside." The two of them groped their way further in. It turned out that Shan had used the flashlight to see a large cabinet in the corner of the room. She opened the door and quickly swept the light around. There were some things hanging in the cabinet. It was hard to see clearly because it was so rushed. But the cabinet was still quite spacious. The two of them quickly climbed inside. The footsteps entered the room. It stopped, in a dead silence. Then suddenly there was a loud thump. In the dark cabinet, both of them were constantly contemplating whether to crack open the cabinet door to see who it was. But fear had won over curiosity. Both of them tried to breathe as softly as possible and didn't dare to move rashly. Both were thankful for their wise decision, because the footsteps sounded again. This time the footsteps weren't as heavy as before, but shuffling and dragging squeaked on the concrete floor. But the squeaking was getting closer to the cabinet where they were hiding. In the darkness, Shan reached out towards Xing, and Xing sensed it and grabbed it. Xing felt like she was holding a small stone. It turned out that, although Shan seemed fearless, like her, Shan also felt despair as the footsteps drew closer. The footsteps stopped right in front of the cabinet, and the two of them were completely desperate as the cabinet door slowly opened. There was no light, the room was still not lit. Who had entered the dark room without turning on the light? The two of them cowered in the corner of the cabinet. After the cabinet door was opened, there was still no movement. It seemed the person was just standing there stunned. Then there was a series of rustling sounds. It seemed a hand reached in, groping around, taking something out. Then the cabinet door was closed tightly. The shuffling footsteps moved away from the cabinet. The two of them pressed their ears against the cabinet wall, listening intently, only hoping it would go far away. But the sound still lingered in the room. Suddenly, a soft sigh echoed in, and without a word, both of them shivered. After a moment, everything was unexpectedly silent. In this silence, Xing realized that the sharp, stinging smell in the room was the smell of formaldehyde, still used to preserve the anatomical specimens. In fact, the sharp smell of formaldehyde always permeated the entire anatomy building. You could smell it as soon as you stepped inside. The only difference was that the smell in this room was unusually strong. It seemed that besides the formaldehyde smell, there was also a medicinal smell that was extremely unpleasant. No doubt, this was probably where a large amount of formaldehyde was stored, and it was very likely that it also contained a lot of corpses. Another soft sigh, but for Yixing, whose nerves were strained to the breaking point, it was like a thunderclap. Then there was a creak, as if someone was opening a window. Then a light whoosh sound was heard, after which Xing smelled the fragrance of incense. What on earth was this person doing? Late at night, who would enter the anatomy building to burn incense? Just a moment later, a bizarre, Extremely harsh, jerky, groaning sound completely shattered the silence here. The bizarre sound clung to Xing's neck, making her shiver in terror. Feeling a slight itch in her ear, she realized that Shan was bringing her mouth close to her ear, whispering, "This person, or this ghost must have realized that we're around. They're burning drugged incense to make us faint, and maybe making those strange sounds to torture us to death. We can't just sit here and wait to die. At least, I want to see what they're up to, or how that ghost intends to harm people." Strangely enough, after the extreme fear, Xing wanted to know the truth. Even if it meant facing great risk or even more terror. She nodded in agreement. The cabinet door was opened a narrow crack, and the two of them peeked out. They were stunned by the scene before them. The small room was no longer as dark as before. The west-facing window was wide open, and the bright moonlight illuminated the room, shining on a hunched back. On that hunched back was a large, bald head bowed down. In front of him was a bed, and on the bed lay someone, perhaps a corpse. In his hand, he held a power saw, preparing to dissect the body on the bed. Xing and Shan seemed to cling tightly to the cabinet door together, which was why they didn't fall to the ground in terror. After they caught their breath, they suddenly felt a sticky feeling on their hands. They brought them to their noses to smell, and were assaulted by the stench of blood. It was fresh blood. The defensive line that the two had built to prevent terror collapsed. They screamed together. The hunchbacked man slowly turned around. Although she was extremely frightened, Shan still remembered to switch on the flashlight. She shone it on the man's face. He was a man in his 50s with a fierce face, looking slightly surprised. He said hoarsely, "I didn't expect it to be two girls. To dare come all the way in here. You're very brave." Looking closely, they saw that the old man was wearing a rubber skirt around his body and rubber gloves on his hands, enough to tell them that he was just a technician from the anatomy laboratory. "Come on now, don't be afraid. I'm just a technician, dissecting this corpse into specimens. You two are really something. Sneaking around here in the middle of the night, hiding in this messy tool cabinet. What's so great about that? All right, I won't ask which class you're in or demand to see your student ID cards, or report it to the security office. Go back and get some sleep." The hunchbacked old man was afraid of scaring them even more, so he spoke to them gently at first, but after a few sentences, his words and expression became stern, clearly showing his disapproval of these uninvited guests. Shan carefully said, "No wonder we heard such heavy footsteps. It turned out you were carrying this corpse in here. Where did the corpse come from? Do you even need to ask?" "Of course, it came from the morgue of the No. 1 affiliated hospital. The distance is short, and it's just one corpse, so I carried it here. If I were to transport more, I'd have to use a tricycle. Why are you asking so many questions? Go home now." "Uncle, did you know that we were in this building, and guess that we were hiding in your tool cabinet? You're a very organized person, aren't you?" The hunchbacked old man had thought that the two girls would quickly slip away, but he didn't expect Shan to ask one question after another. He was both annoyed and amused. "Of course I am. But how do you know?" Shan replied, "Because I guessed that you usually keep the front door closed, but tonight the door wasn't closed, so you knew someone was inside. And you also guessed that we would hide here. You came to look at the door of the room, which was only partially closed, but when we came in here, we forgot and closed the door tightly, so you were even more suspicious. Is that right? When we came into the cabinet to hide, we were very flustered and messed up the clothes and tools that you had neatly arranged, so you knew right away we were hiding in the cabinet as soon as you reached in. You also guessed that we would definitely peek out, so you smeared fresh blood on the door to scare us." The hunchbacked old man smiled faintly. "I didn't expect this little girl to be so clever. You guessed very well. However, at first, I thought it was some mischievous boys, but I didn't expect it to be two female students. The 90s are different, times have changed. You girls are really bold. You flatter us too much. It's just that we were taught well by Agatha Christie. Can you tell us why you work at night? The room is dark. Why don't you turn on the lights? And why do you burn incense? This building, the hunchbacked old man interrupted. Won't you stop? You were just praised for being clever. Why don't you think? This building has a lot of people coming and going, and it doesn't have a basement. If I were to dissect a corpse here during the day, wouldn't that be quite a sight? Why would I want to work at night for no reason? I have repeatedly asked the school to arrange a relatively quiet and private place to work, but the school lacks rooms and funding. The facilities here are all from 40 years ago. As for why I don't like to turn on the lights to work, it's just a personal preference. You don't need to go on, just go home. Even if you don't say it, it's as good as said. You're afraid that if there are lights on, the corpses will recognize you, and the spirits will follow you forever. You burn incense because you want to ward off evil spirits. I guessed right again, didn't I? Yang Shan got an inch and wanted a mile, pressing the old man with a barrage of questions. Nonsense. The hunchbacked old man suddenly stood up, his eyes a little fierce. His hand holding the power saw seemed to tremble slightly with anger. I won't bother with you today. You go. Don't talk nonsense like this again, understand? I only want what's good for you. Go. Xing also felt that Shan was going too far and pulled Shan's hand. Let's go. They were almost out of the room when Shan turned back. Uncle, I want to ask one last question. I heard there are ghosts in this building. Is that true? The hunchbacked old man suddenly pressed the button on the power saw. He shouted loudly, seemingly drowning out the sound of the saw. That's absolutely right. Tonight, I'm meeting ghosts, so I ran into you mouthy little girl. Get out of here! The two of them ran slowly. As they were about to reach the door of the building, Xing suddenly tripped. Just as she was falling, she saw a flash of white light in front of her. The shadow of the girl in the long white dress, the one she kept seeing in her dreams, flashed past very quickly, and the two words moonlight softly echoed in her ear. Shan quickly helped Xing up. Xing suddenly grabbed Shan tightly, asking vaguely, "What is moonlight?" Shan was also confused. "What are you talking about?" The shuffling footsteps sounded behind them again. The lights in the corridor suddenly came on, and the hunchbacked old man was striding toward them, his eyes as if they wanted to pop out of their sockets. He came to a stop in front of Xing, put his hands on her shoulders, and asked, "Hey, what are you muttering about?" Xing seemed to suddenly wake up from a dream. She shook her head. "What? I didn't say anything." Shan said, "You just said." But a rough hand immediately covered Shan's mouth. She saw the hunchbacked old man's old face, crisscrossed with wrinkles, looking very stern, so she fell silent. He said clearly, word by word, "No matter what day it is, after midnight, you must never come here, understand?" Xing nodded. Shan said, "You mean Xing can't come, but I can come often, right?" "That's nonsense. You can't either." The hunchbacked old man pushed hard, pushing the two of them out the door. Shan asked again, "I heard that because this threshold is so high, ghosts and spirits can't step out of the building. We're out the door now, so we're safe, right?" The old man didn't bother to answer any more. After the two girls had walked about 20 or 30 steps, he said coldly to their backs, "Throughout history, the greatest evildoers have been people, not ghosts.